Okay guys, welcome to the first ever Dublin Academy solo podcast. All my friends are gone and nobody wanted to be here for this, but me as a man and the students have decided to come in and really give you a dig out biology. I really feel there could be some serious value in this, in that it's just me as a teacher of biology at the Academy just going through exactly how I would approach the exam if I were in your shoes right now. We got a load of questions coming in here, so the way we're going to operate in this podcast is I'm going to talk through the course, I'm going to talk through the different parts of it, I'm going to tell you how the exam works, I'm going to tell you how I feel you should study, and then I'm going to go through your actual questions. And we actually, I can't believe we have 3 pages of questions, and I haven't prepared any answers for them, so you'll see it just off the cuff for that to begin with. Okay, so first things first, you probably have all sat a mock, and you probably know a little bit about the paper layout, and I was sure you made some serious mistakes. That was great for a number of reasons to sit that mock, but the actual score on the front can, if you want it, be absolutely, completely different to the one in your Leaving Cert. Okay, you still have plenty of time in Leaving Cert Biology as long as you take it for exactly what it is, and you don't completely kind of go all over the place with the subject itself. There is definitely lots of content on the Leaving Cert Biology course. There are, depending on how you break it up, 38 topics for you to go through. However, I would suggest that if you study it in a certain way, if you're smart about it, you can really narrow it down. Okay, the way these topics are broken up is we've got 3 units, Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3. Okay, now that's obviously fairly straightforward, but Unit 1, if you're taking this down right now, which potentially you should be, I would put a star beside that. That is the most important thing on the course, and we'll come back and we'll see why. Unit 1 consists of the scientific method, food and ecology. So realistically, a little bit of science, common sense, food and ecology, 2 chapters. Okay? Unit 2, after that, that's all the DNA and all that sort of stuff. So there's about 4 or 5 topics, depending how you break it up there. Then we've got the cell, photosynthesis, respiration, and enzymes. Okay? And that's how I break it up. So I kind of think of that as part A and part B. So part A, all the DNA and the genetics and all that sort of stuff that a lot of students don't really like, and then part B. Okay, but realistically around 9 topics in that, depending obviously on how you break it up. Unit 3, very long. If I was to write these on a piece of paper, if you were to see the breakdown on a video we did last year on the course, you would see that there is actually tons of topics. Okay, but I'm going to break it down just the way we're talking about it now, is we speak about microorganisms, then we speak about plant biology, and we have a real long section on human biology. And very often, that is where people spend the majority of their study. I want you to flip that on its head and think of it. I'm not saying it's not important, it definitely 100% is, but think of that as almost your last port of call. Okay, almost your last port of call. Now, thinking about why you're listening to this podcast, you're not listening to this to become the best biologist in the world. Okay, certainly Leaving Cert Biology cannot actually make you the best biologist in the world. A lot of the stuff that we learn, if you're interested in this outside the course, is outdated. It doesn't make sense anymore. It's just not true. It's not factual. A lot of the stuff is edited down so it can be shoehorned into something that students can study. Like, where do you stop? Okay, and that's the same with many subjects, by the way, but biology in particular, especially because a lot of people like it outside of the subject itself, and maybe because of, like, I don't know, TV shows that you watch. Okay, so that's not why you're listening to this. You're listening to this because you're going to sit an exam, like the one you've just sat, and you want to get points out of it. So that's the way I'm going to approach it here. The fact that the only thing you want out of this, or from the Dublin Academy of Education, is you want a grade. At the end of the day, that's why you're in. You're in to get a grade and move on. Okay? First things first, a lot of people think biology is very easy compared to the other subjects. And potentially it is. But if you look at the breakdown of H1s in the Leaving Cert, actually last year the least amount of H1s was in biology of the 3 Leaving Cert subjects. Now that could be a combination of the people who actually study it, the amount of people who go ahead and do it, but percentage-wise it was the least amount. The exam itself, it's only an exam. So for example, in our school today, there's students out on a geography field trip. So that can be a massive advantage for certain students because that actually gives them a certain percentage going into their exam. And I'm sure other subjects are quite similar to that, but this is only one exam, one 3-hour long exam. Now, for me, as a teacher, I teach maths as well. The way the maths exam is split up is unbelievable, okay? Because, again, it is 125 points, but it's split over 2 papers. One of them is on a Friday, and one of them is on the Monday. So you have the whole weekend in between there to not only predict things that didn't appear on paper 1, that then come up in paper 2. But also you've that whole weekend to kind of like readjust and see how much focus you got to put into it. Biology itself is actually a terrible time. So biology then is we have it on the Tuesday, and like you've already had probably an exam before that. You've probably spent the weekend studying your Irish and studying your maths. Terrible time in terms of like your actual cramming and your revision time. Make no mistake about it, you will be tired in the middle of your Leaving Cert exam. So it's terrible to cram. So I first of all tell my students, okay, well, make sure your study is done like the weekend before, 10 days before, so you're just revising stuff. All your major studies should be done before the Leaving Cert actually, before it starts. Okay, but you only have that period to perform in the exam, to basically take your 2 years worth of study and cram it into that at a poor time and only one exam. So you have to be an expert at it. Okay, you have to be an expert of what comes up in the exam. And it's very, very simple. As you would have seen from your mocks, you might not have seen this in 5th year or maybe in other exams in 6th year, it's broken down into 3 sections. Section A, Section B, and Section C. Now traditionally, the 3 sections are known by people as Section A, short questions, Section B, experiments, and Section C, long questions. Okay, and that's okay, but it gives students a false sense of how much the examiner actually wants of them. In Section A, the examiner has to, like it cannot deviate from this, ask you 2 questions from Unit 1, 2 questions from Unit 2, or 2 questions from Unit 2, and 2 questions from Unit 3. And on that, you get a choice. You only have to answer 5 out of those 6 questions. So when you see my study plan in a minute, I'm going to tell you that you should potentially know the exact number question that you are asking or you're going to answer before you go into the exam. Okay, so if you can see that sort of breakdown there, Unit 1 we said is food and ecology. 2 of those questions in Section A have to be from Unit 1. So like food and ecology. So that's not even a prediction, that is it. Okay, 2 of the sections have to be from Unit 2. Now I'd suggest one of them would be from Part A and one of them from Part B. And then you have 2 questions left over. And there's an absolute rake of chapters for you to try like predict and go through that sort of stuff there. The experiments. Okay, so sorry, that first section, you answer 5 questions on it, 20 marks each. Very, very handy. So that first question, it's 25%. It's handy enough of your entire grade. So 5% per question that you decide to answer. I'll talk about an exam strategy about which ones you go into now in a second. For the second part, the experiments themselves, there's 3 questions that come up. There are 23 experiments on the course. Okay, there's 3 questions that come up. You have to answer 2 of them. What the examiner has done in recent years is they've actually made one of those 3 questions a mixture of certain experiments. Now I feel that potentially might have been done so students may not like predict what questions are coming up. However, it actually has made it easier for students because when they ask a mixed question, as I call it, they can't go into much detail. So just a little knowledge of these experiments, if you elect to do that question, it's actually fine to get the full marks on that. No student of mine, I would be very, very upset if a student of mine, unless barring a massive mistake in the exam, should be looking to get less than 50 of the 60 marks on display. You answer 2 of the questions, so two experiment questions, 30 marks each. Okay, so you kind of know. I'm going to give you some ideas of predictions and stuff going into that. You kind of know which ones you're going for, and you have a choice. So you should be not aiming for less than 50. And I know you're kind of thinking, okay, well the experiments are quite long and stuff. They simply aren't. The experiments are dramatically different in the way you answer a question on a paper versus what you do in a lab and what you do for a report. All those write-ups and everything, that's fantastic for you to be a scientist, not for the paper. So if you keep it short and sharp, if you look at any of the past paper questions, very easy to do very well on these questions as long as you're prepared. And then if you actually look at Section C, so the long questions, 240 marks. Okay, so the majority of your score is essentially coming from this. It's actually laid out in a nice way for us as well. One of the questions has to come from Unit 1. Okay, 1 from Unit 1, 2 from Unit 2. Okay, and then 3 from Unit 3. Now, of those questions that are remaining there, you have a choice as well. There's 6 questions. You have to answer 4. Okay, so you have to answer 4, each worth 60 marks. If you elect to pick question 14 and 15, actually in there with A, B, and C, there's parts A, B, and C. Now, there's A, B, and C in them all, but in those ones there, you get a choice for question 14 and 15 between that A, B, and C. So that's absolutely fantastic. So if you decide to pick those questions, you even have a choice within those. So it actually allows students to potentially leave out certain chapters as we go through it. Okay, so it's actually really good. Now, in terms of answering those questions, people call them the long questions. Look at any marking scheme ever. You actually will do way worse if you start to answer this like a business question, or I don't know, any other subject like that. It's like that. As an examiner, we're looking for key points. We're looking for, do you know the information? In fact, if you get asked for 2 key points and you put down 3 and one of them is incorrect, it's going to cancel one of your wrong answers. So you've got to be really specific on these answers. So that's kind of the main idea going into the exam. I would suggest, say you're sitting the exam, I would suggest you know exactly what questions you're going to answer going into it. Again, this is actually all on one of our YouTube videos before, so you should have a look at that if you're not too sure, you want a visual on it. Okay, so what I would do with my students, if you were sitting down to study now to completely change your grade, I would make sure, and this is not like any other subject, I'd make sure you build on a base. And your base has to be, like it just has to be, Unit 1 plus the experiments. In fact, you can pass the entire exam by studying Unit 1 in the experiments. Unit 1 by itself, if you study that, know it inside out, i.e. food and ecology, i.e. 2 of the 38 topics, you could get, well, it's definitely 25%, but it could be up to 32.5% if they ask experiments in that as well. So your step 3 in your study should be microorganisms based around bacteria. Now, I would also note from that in terms of fungi, rhizopus and sexual reproduction, that sort of stuff, and rhizopus like that, I wouldn't concentrate massively on that. From looking at last year's paper, I wouldn't kind of say that has a lot to do with this year's paper. So you could even leave that out. I wouldn't say leave it out altogether, but you could maybe not so much focus on that. So that was your microorganisms. Step 4 in your study plan has to be, well, all of these next ones are interchangeable, just let me say. So these 2 are interchangeable. So you could say microorganisms first, but step 4 would be plant biology. Now, you saying to me, like you kind of saying, oh, plant biology, you're not really saying anything on that. I actually am. I'm saying to you that plant biology, the amount that you need to know is so minuscule. And a student that's going to do well on plant biology, simply because like it's not relatable. A lot of students don't find it as relatable as maybe the human biology, and a lot of teachers as well. So it's not massively focused on. But a student that actually understands the processes and can connect the different topics is going to do well. So what I mean with that is, like microorganisms, study it as one chapter. Okay. Now with microorganisms, you're relating to obviously different things. But with plant biology, if you kind of talk about it in terms of water going from the roots up and have everything and have a general understanding of a plant, you will do quite well. Now, I would suggest as well that sexual reproduction in a plant did come up last year. In fact, the idea of the formation of the embryo sac, a lot of students found quite difficult. My students wouldn't have found it difficult simply because I broke it down into easy concepts versus knowing 12 things about it when you're only going to be asked for 3 points on it. So that would have been fine. However, I would suggest you can't leave it out. It is another concept that sexual reproduction in a plant, maybe actual massive detail on it is not necessary, but you definitely should understand it and understand the advantages of it versus the disadvantages of it. Same with asexual reproduction. That leads me into the idea for this year. This is not a massive prediction or anything, but I have been spending a little bit of time in school on vegetative propagation, and the reason being it's not very frequent. In terms of when it has come up. It last came up in 2017 as a proper question. It did come up in 2016 for a 9 marker, but before that was 2013, and I just feel in terms of the gap that would just be something to focus on. Remember, that is just asexual reproduction in a plant. There's not massive amounts of knowledge for you to know on that. You could actually write down everything you need to know on plants in shorthand form on an A4 sheet. I also personally build my study around diagrams. Some students like that, some students don't. The diagrams there are a few that you could potentially be asked to draw, and also it helped me kind of understand it and help me link everything together. I'd start with the structure, break it down into the different parts of the roots and the stem and the leaf and the gas exchange in the leaf, that sort of stuff. Have a few bullet points beside that. And then after that, I would actually go back to Unit 2 and study all the DNA stuff. So you will have noticed that we've covered, like in this, I'll talk about the DNA, but when I say the DNA stuff, we've covered half potentially the topics, but we've covered the majority of the exam questions. And we know, because we have choice on our exam, that a couple of bullet points ago, or a couple of ideas ago, we would potentially have gotten 100%. because you don't have to do every single question. And you'll notice that I haven't mentioned human biology yet. Now, I'm not saying to leave that out, but I'm just saying that that is how I would study it. After that, I would look at the DNA sort of stuff. I know a lot of students don't like, say, for example, genetics crosses. I would say that without even looking at the questions here. However, in terms of actually drawing a genetic cross, they're quite easy, quite predictable, and you've only actually had to draw a genetic cross 4 times. The rest of the questions, the other 3 topics in that genetics chapter, are actually just understanding knowledge. And if you actually go ahead and understand the definitions, that helps you with the genetic crosses themselves. A lot of students find once they get a genetic cross question in their head, that's a banker for them. That's a 100%er that potentially someone else can't do. So, but what I would say is, I did have a student once who's he just kept coming to me asking me questions, and I wasn't actually his teacher in biology at the time. I was his maths teacher, but he was asking me, he was like, I can't get this genetics cross, can you teach me this next one? And I couldn't, no matter how often I told him that he didn't need to know these, he could just leave them out and focus on other questions. He spent 8 weeks, or 6 or 8 weeks, I can't remember, going through it. And at the expense of the other topics, which we've clearly seen are way, way, way more important. And then I would go into human biology, and I would split the human biology up into the systems and everything else. And I'd first focus on the systems, so the heart and that sort of stuff. Now, it's interesting to note that a lot of teachers who spend a lot of time on the heart and a lot of time on the respiratory system, they are important, and they do help you understand the whole nature of human biology, and they could potentially be questions. But the heart, out of the 15 years of your Leaving Cert, has only been asked 8 times. 4 of them have actually been the heart experiment. So 4 out of 15 for the heart versus 14 out of 15 for respiration. It's an absolute no-brainer. Okay, so I would leave all the human biology till the very end. Now, in terms of how I would study it, it kind of depends on where you're at. If you know absolutely nothing, I would go to get the notes from the school, and I'd make my own notes on it, make sure I understand the concepts. Or if you already know stuff on it, I would try and make my own notes from my head about what the examiner could ask me, and I would try exam questions. One of the absolute hidden tips in biology, or in any subject, is, okay, you did a mock, but you can actually do a way more Leaving Cert focus mock you could print off the last 15 years of the Leaving Cert paper, and you can do it. You could sit in your bedroom and do it. You could break it up into 2 if you want, and then you could correct it. You get all the marking schemes online, all the instructions about how to correct it online. So not only do you see where you went wrong, okay, in real time, so you can correct it straight after, but also you see what the examiner awards and has been awarding marks for, and you get a greater understanding of the course. So actually potentially sitting at home doing, let's say, the 2009 paper could be way more beneficial than actually sitting your mock in school that you crammed for along with a load of other mocks you barely remember doing. You get it back, and some 3 or 4 weeks later, and some potentially not Leaving Cert examiner has corrected it with no change in the marking scheme. The marking scheme usually changes 3 or 4 times over a summer, and you have no feedback because you don't even remember actually doing it. So that is another hack on that. That's how I personally would study it. In fact, if you are quite good at biology, you could actually just do all the papers and not have to study any more chapters anymore. Okay. However, if you kind of are saying, "Geez, in my school we're studying it really, really big and not exam focused on that," potentially it's an idea for you to get in contact with the school, join the biology bootcamp, download some of our free notes online, or look at our videos. At Easter, we will be going through all of this stuff. And I will be tearing it apart, showing you the type of questions that the examiner asks. But in a short podcast here, obviously I can't go through 2 years worth of stuff. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to move to actually speaking about looking at your questions here. And I'm hesitant currently to look at the ideas on predictions. Now, I've told you a few ideas and predictions in this podcast here. However, I want to get a little bit closer to the time. We will have a specific podcast for predictions. There's no point in me saying predictions, people just studying only that and messing up. Work on what I've said there for you. You just for the next 4 weeks or the next 5 weeks, Unit 1 plus experiments, then the photosynthesis, enzymes, and respiration. And if you see me in the school or whatever, or underneath, feel free to ask any questions on that. But go through those ideas there. Experiment predictions. First focus I would have is on enzymes. But before that even, I would just sign up to the Biology Bootcamp where that stuff is there completely free. Then it says, okay, covering the course. Can you indicate which ones are not important? Well, it's all important. It could all potentially be asked as a question, but you don't have to answer any question on that course there. So I would suggest, if I were you, making sure you're familiar with the layout of the paper, which I've just gone through there. Again, I would probably say human biology is the least important. However, it does help me tie it in. When I go through all the human biology, I can refer back to all the stuff we've spoken about before. Can you avoid ecology fully? Hopefully, well, you can, I guess. However, hopefully you realise now that just spending a couple hours on that and really hammering that out is massively beneficial versus many other chapters. Haven't started studying, not long. What should I focus on? Do not go to part 2 until you've studied Unit 1 and the experiments. Are there specific key chapters? Okay, well, answer that. And then from Amber, how do I know what to learn? Course is very overwhelming. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit better about it now, but I can't stress enough that study plan. Diagrams. So these are some questions I get sometimes. So from Gurkus, which is, I've never heard of that name before, but it's a beautiful name. Should diagrams be coloured in? No, if you want, but no. How are diagrams marked? That's a very good question. Differently every single year. However, what's important is labels and not your artistic ability. So another one from Itzy. Nearly made a joke about a spider there, but Itzy, good name, great, lovely name. How much does drawing abilities matter? Nothing. Now, obviously, if you like, there is certain things like a plant cell should be rectangular or square versus like an animal cell being circular. That's fine, but other than that, it's all about labels. And if you look at any of the marking schemes in that, labels. So labels are what's important. Your diagram can be the biggest piece of crap in the world. To guarantee a H1, well, there's absolutely no guarantees, but what you can do is you can put yourself in you can minimize any potential failings that might take you out of the H1 bracket. So what I would do is I would go home and I would print off every single exam paper and every single marking scheme, and I'd put myself under exam conditions, and I would do the paper. I would do one of the papers and then I would correct it myself, and I would make some notes on it, and then I go to the next paper and the next paper and so on. And the more you put yourself under exam conditions, the easier it's going to be on the day. It's going to be almost boring on the day. Second thing I would say is a lot of students answer exam papers with the notes in front of them, and they convince themselves they know what's going on there, but you should definitely separately go, like maybe for the first couple you can use the notes, and then after that go away from it. Obviously it depends on your level, but if you're going for a H1, definitely do not use the notes. And then I would also say you should have an exam plan. So any of my students would have an exam plan going in. I would suggest you go into you start with section A. There's all the timing is on the paper there for you. If you answer it the way I tell you to answer it, and you've studied the way I've studied, timing won't be an issue. You've plenty of time to answer it. Short key points. Okay. But going into section A, remember, we know where all the different marks are coming from. We know what's going in. I would suggest that my students would go straight away for the Unit 1 questions, as we saw before, and then top it up with the Unit 2, and then try attempt one of the Unit 3 questions. If one doesn't go to plan, if there's one that you're like, I just simply can't answer it, I would answer the other Unit 3 question on that. But I'd only go for 5 questions in that first of all to begin with. I would then go to the experiments. I'd read through them. I'd make sure that I can answer 2 of them. So I'd pick my favourite 2. I'd go ahead, go absolutely through with that. And then going into section C, I would look at the different options. Again, you probably have some sort of plan. Hopefully your first idea is your Unit 1 question, which you can almost predict. It's going to be the exact same idea, food or ecology. So you go in and do that. Then I would probably tell my students to look at the Unit 2 questions, pick out the ideas for that. And you answer your best 4. Now make sure if you pick 14 or 15 that you can answer 2 out of the 3 parts in display. Very often people might see part A, bacteria, and then not be able to answer the part B or part C. So suddenly you're only getting marked out of 50% of those marks. So I would go in with a study plan and apply that obviously to your mocks that you're doing at home, your past Leaving Cert papers. So that's what I would do. I would also, the other idea would be to have your study completely covered and completely done, as we said, the weekend before, because you're not going to be you're not going to have a lot of extra time to go ahead and cram and get lots of study in once the Leaving Cert begins. And if you think about it, the couple of days before the Leaving Cert, you're probably thinking about English, you're probably thinking about maths. So get your biology done before that, and then only have to spend maybe 10 minutes a day looking at a key point or a key topic or something like that. Is it possible to get H1 or H2 if you haven't been working? Yeah, follow the plan. Difference between H1 and H2 students, well, basically the difference is that they actually understand what the examiner is asking. So a lot of the times people see photosynthesis regurgitate everything they have down there onto the page. They could know loads about biology, however they're not specific to the question, as we spoke about before. If you put something down that is incorrect, it could cancel one of your correct answers, and therefore you don't end up doing as well. So read the question. Read the question. Every teacher's going to say that, but definitely read the question. You would also kind of say to yourself, okay, I did read the question. The only way to really combat that is, again, to mass cover the exam questions, as we've said. So if you've made the mistake 3 times in a certain paper and you've marked it and you've realized that you're going to get frustrated, hopefully that will not occur in the exam itself. If you fail your biology mock, should you move to ordinary? I don't know you, Michaela. But what I would say is you just have to have an honest opinion on yourself. How hard did you work for it? What was your plan like? What was your plan going into the mock? Did you know what questions to pick? Did you just show up on the day, study absolutely everything kind of blanketly, and then not be able to answer the questions? If that's the answer, I would suggest try another mock with the study plan. And once you've listened to this podcast, however, again, if you just study Unit 1 plus the experiments, as I've said, probably 5 or 6 times, you can pass the paper. You could do that this weekend in 4 hours. So probably not. But you can always, if you're really, really, really nervous, a couple of weeks before, make the decision. You can drop on the day. I wouldn't recommend that, because making an emotional decision on the day is probably not the best decision ever. So you have your plan for that beforehand. There's some topic specific ideas here. Drawing the stages of meiosis and mitosis. I would suggest that the stages of mitosis are quite important. I base them around, if you think about a prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, PMAT. The way I draw them is P stands for preparing, so it's preparing to divide, the nuclear membrane breaking down and the spindle fibers appearing. PM, metaphase, M, middle, the chromosomes are down the middle. That's how you recognize or draw that one. A is apart, so the chromosomes start to pull apart, or anaphase, and then T, telophase, 2. Okay, so it starts to split into 2. That could be an animal or it could be a plant. So I would draw those ideas, but I keep it very simple. Every diagram you're going to see in every book and on the internet is going to be completely different. In fact, this is one of the things in biology that we don't go into much detail in. So what I would do is make sure whatever diagram you draw is Leaving Cert specific. Okay, but keep it simple on that. And I feel that's going to be important. You might remember the short question last year wasn't well received because they actually had proper pictures from a microscope. Have a look at that. Can you explain protein synthesis? Yes, Amy, I can. But I can't explain it in a couple of minutes. But I would say base your study around 2 things. So first of all, there's 3 words. So you've got transcription, translation, and folding. Know a little bit about that. And your other part of the study, the different RNAs that come into play. If you understand those, even just in a small amount, then you'll be able to answer pretty much all of the questions. Can genetics be left out? Yes, we talked about that. Cool. So what's the best way to study biology? Well, we've spoken about it there. So making your notes short and then the questions. I find it interesting to relate the different topics to each other. However, potentially if you're doing it by yourself, that might be slightly difficult. Question from Paperbag Club. What is the best way to learn something you don't understand? Well, I don't understand that question, mate. But what I would do is, again, if it was a topic you don't understand, I'd break it down into the key points. There is loads of videos on YouTube that might not be, again, Leaving Cert specific, but they might be able to visually talk you through show you through the process. Some of them are Leaving Cert specific, but most of them aren't. Make sure you don't study too much of the stuff, because every course is going to be slightly different in terms of studying biology. But that's a good thing. So I would have a look at some videos on that. What tips do you have for studying? Talk about that. Best way to learn the experiments. Okay, biology bootcamp. I think the link will be underneath this. 6 topics to maximize marks. We've already discussed that. Best way to remember terms. So we do have a Banker's Bible that we will be releasing in the school and giving out, and potentially it might be online here, that just has all the terms. However, terms you don't have to know word for word. The best way is to understand what they actually mean, I'd suggest. Now, there is certain topics like ecology where they kind of are interchangeable, they're kind of the same. So potentially just speaking that out with a friend and just working on that ecology terms will be massively beneficial. Otherwise, terms, they're quite loose. As long as you understand what they mean, you should be okay for that. But we have a Banker's Bible that does have every single term on the course going into it, as well as every diagram and loads of other stuff in the school here. Exam techniques. So Esther, what length should your answers be? Well, it depends on the question, doesn't it? Short answers, short questions. They ask you for 2 things. You write down 2 things. I wouldn't even write it as an English sentence. It's not an English exam. Spelling doesn't matter. Okay, obviously to a certain extent I have to recognise it, but spelling doesn't matter. My spelling is atrocious. So what length should your answers be? Short. That's pretty much what I can say. And if you have a specific question for what do you mean from that, there are certain words in the course that I can't really get into now where they ask for certain ideas, but generally you're not going to be asked for more than 3 or 4 bullet points. I would emphasise to the examiner by using a bullet point. And then a question from Josh: what would you recommend attempting? Would you recommend attempting extra long questions if you've spare time? You should have spare time if you study the way I study it, and then once you're finished, I wouldn't leave the hall. They're going to mark you on your best questions from section A, B and C. If you have spare time, I'd go do my extra question on section A, then I would go ahead and I would do my extra question on section C, and then I would go back to the experiments. And the reason I do it in that order is probably the short questions very, very easy to answer, the section A. Section C is potentially, maybe you made a mistake on one of the ones you chose before, and the experiments, if you have studied them the way I've told you to, potentially will be if you do another question, should be the least grade changer if they decide to pick that one. So definitely 100% do the extra questions. They will pick your best ones regardless of what order that you have done them in. Okay, so I don't actually know how long that was, but hopefully that was beneficial for you. If you've got any further questions, you can sign up below. My main takeaway points, if I were you, were knowing your study plan. Definitely follow that. Sign up to the biology bootcamp and try exam papers. If there's anything specifically you'd like me to cover or answer in any way, shape or form, please let us know down below. And definitely for the 50th time, sign up to the biology bootcamp. Cool, Leaving Cert Biology. And we will be coming back with you again with some more experiments. We'll have an experiment series of the podcast with some of our super cool special guests on. And yeah, cool. Cheers. Roll outro.